Has Alaska reached the breaking point where it is no longer affordable for people to live here? Is it at the point where we have a full on housing affordability crisis in the state of Alaska? My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm an associate real estate broker in the state of Alaska, and my mission, as always, is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching in real estate. And today we're going to be talking about all things affordability, and we're going to be using a lot of resources that you're going to find through sources like the multiple listing service, and we're also going to be getting information from websites and from sources like the Alaska Department of Labor and Statistics. So we're going to be trying to get all the credible sources out there in order to give you a full picture as to the affordability. And keep in mind, this is just for Alaska. I'm sure if you pull the layers back of where you're currently at, good chances are you're going to see pretty similar numbers. So let's go and jump into this, though. Oh, but real quick, before we do, get this video like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, because that really does help with the channel. And let's jump into it. All right, now, first off, we're going to look at the average sold price. And I'd kind of prefer to look at the year-to-date, but around this time of year, there's a lot of issues with kind of funky year-to-date statistics because we're kind of warming up for the summer months. And then, yeah, it gets complicated. So we're going to look at the two most recent months that we have from the MLS and give you an idea for what's been going on as far as the average sold price, specifically in Anchorage, and then we'll look at the Matsu. So first off, what we see for the for Anchorage is that for the month of February, we went from about 400, this year is about 463,000 and going to about 2019 where, it was before COVID and all that happened. It was right around $351,000. So what that shows us is that there was a very sharp increase for the average sold price just across the board. And if we look at other months, we see a pretty similar as well. That's a pretty aggressive uptick in the amount of average sold price. And obviously, average sold price does play a pretty big role as far as the affordability for the entire area. But let's go and take a look and see what we see in the Matsu Valley. All right, now when we look at the Matsu Valley, what we see is that the average sold price has actually gone up at a more aggressive rate than even what it did over in Anchorage, because the average sold price for the month of February 2024 is about $400,000, and the same month for the year 2019, we see that it's actually right around $264,000. So that's about a $140,000 increase for the average sold price in the Matsu Valley. While at the same time, interest rates are compared to what we were at the time, I think they're actually a little bit higher now than what they were then. Average sold price, again, higher in the area than what they were the past couple of years. Okay, so that is just looking at what's going on in the average sold price, but let's go ahead and take a look at stats that are coming out from the Alaska Department of Labor and Statistics, because these are going to be some more primary sources that's going to show us what's actually happening in the area. So first off, what we see is when we look at this index here is that we're at about 1.41 as far as the index goes here. And it did dip all the way down to about 1.2 affordability index, and this goes from 1992 to 2022. And unfortunately, they don't really have a whole lot of details here as to their methodologies and how they determines this specifically. But what I do see is that the affordability did have this sizable dip, as you can see in 2020, where it was down to about 1.2. And then as the interest rates started going back up in about 2021, 2022, then you see that affordability just going right back to where it was pre-COVID. So that is about what we would expect. And we're kind of seeing the same thing played out in the affordability index with the state as we would expect to see in the MLS numbers. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is what's going on with the average sold price for single-family homes, just with the information from the Alaska Department of Labor and Statistics, looking at 1992 to 2022. Now, what makes this a little bit different is here at the bottom, you see they actually have inflation-adjusted sales price. So this is saying based upon the income in the area and what the inflation rates are and everything. This is what the price would be. And what you see is back in 1992 is it was actually staying pretty consistent, pretty neck and neck there for a little bit. And then as we started going a little further along in the 90s, you can see there's really starting to be kind of this divergent split. And it really starts to become apparent once we get to about the early 2000s, about mid 2005 or so, we start to really see that split happening to where the average sold price is going up. But once it's adjusted for inflation, it's not going up too much. So really the takeaway from this is really just that we have average sold price going up, yes, but a big driving factor of it is going to be the cost of inflation that's going up. Last but not least, I just wanted to show this for everybody, just kind of once and for all, because I know for some people the and foreclosures are a big deal, and some people really expect see a repeat of the 2009, 2010 markets, 2008, I guess. And they just really expect history to repeat itself and to suddenly see this big rush of foreclosures, and suddenly that's going to take care of the affordability issue. And that is just not what we're seeing here in the numbers, because what we see is back in looking as far back as about the mid 1990s, you see an incredible explosion of foreclosures where it spikes up to about 600, nearly 7,000 foreclosures for the entire year. And for a market of this size, that's quite a bit. Okay. So there was this huge spike, and then it kind of started dropping. Sorry, that was in the 80s, which it was what was happening at that point was there was a big drop in the oil prices at the time. And for a state like Alaska, where there's just so much of our economy is tied up in what's going on with the oil, then that is going to have a big impact on the entire state. And some people were just so broke, they weren't even trying to sell their homes. They just dropped the keys off and had told someone else to take care of it. And that's why we saw like that huge spike here as far as the foreclosures. Now, what happened as we went along is those foreclosures kind of got absorbed into the rest of the state here. And since then, it's more or less kind of been about the same. It's usually kind of been hovering just around 1,000 foreclosures for the entire year for the entire state. Since 2000 and since about 2020, we're seeing maybe 400 foreclosures for the entire state, and that's not likely to change anytime soon. And the reason for that is that if a property is in distress, there's a good chance you're just never going to hear about it because they're just going to list it just like normal. And there's a good chance that they're going to be able to get their full offer price, and they kind of get bailed out just because the market has been favoring sellers so much. So we're not likely going to see a big uptick of foreclosures anytime soon that's going to come in and save the day. All right, we're going to wrap all this up here for you in just a little bit and give you some of the takeaways and really what it is that you can do with this information. Before we do that, though, do make sure that if you haven't done so already, you go check out my podcast called the Alaskan Journey Podcast, where I discuss with people who've recently moved to Alaska, what they think about Alaska, how they got here, what their experience was like driving on the Alcan, if they took the Alcan, and get all their tips and tricks right there for you in one spot. So do make sure if you haven't listened to it already, you go check that out. We're going to have more episodes coming out here in just a little bit because, as you can see, we have an awesome studio now, and I'm very excited to be able to start focusing on that again instead of figuring out all the technical aspects of putting this thing together. And last but not least, if you're looking at moving to Alaska, do make sure you reach out to me on my website and put relocation guide in the little comment section so I can send you a copy of my relocation guide. Now, let's go ahead and finish today's video talking about the affordability crisis and what the takeaways are. Now, you're going to see a lot of pundits out there and a lot of really educated people really making some far-reaching statements saying they have found the one metric that shows once this happens, then this will happen. And when you see that, you need to be very, very, very suspicious. And that's because when it all comes down to it, there's a very simple principle that just completely overruns any other high-level theory you might hear, and that is simple supply and demand. And if supply and demand and these high level principles ever come in contact with each other and clashes, and they're trying to go against the simple principle of supply and demand, they're going to lose every time. Okay, so the reason we have seen such an explosion in prices in the past couple of years has been, number one, during the time of COVID, everyone was trying to buy a house because the interest rates were so low, and everyone is like, that's it, we're going to get a house, it's not going to get any better than this. And probably right. Probably right. Interest rates are not likely to go that low as far as I can see, bar like another a catastrophic event like a pandemic or something to make that happen. And everyone flooded the market trying to buy a property, or they refinanced. And what that's done now is that's created a shortage, because the people who bought those homes back in 2020, 2021, they are latched on to those houses, and they're not going to let them go unless they absolutely have to. Because first off, it was a ton of work getting them, because let me tell you, it was not easy buying a house at that time. That's something a lot of people seem to forget. And when they complain about homeowners that bought in 2020, 2021, it was not easy getting under contract, let me tell you. But secondly, those folks are probably not going to be going anywhere unless they absolutely have to. And with the interest rates going up, that just makes homeowners hold on to those houses even tighter. And so we're not likely to see a huge uptick of inventory anytime in the near future. Now, there is talk about interest rates going up in the near future. And, that could be something, or I'm sorry, going down. And that's something we've kind of heard off and on for a little bit here, that, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's going to be in a couple of years. It's going to be next quarter. It's just kind of all over the place. So I'm not really putting a whole lot of money in that anytime in the near future. And even if interest rates did come down, it's questionable if it would come down enough to shake loose all those sellers that are holding on to those properties with the low interest rates. It's more likely just going to create a bloodbath for buyers who are all competing for the even smaller inventory pool than what we had back in 2020 and 2021, where we saw this big uptick. Additionally, what we're seeing is that building in Alaska is just usually difficult, just baseline difficult, before you add any of these other economic variables and factors into it, because the supply line for getting stuff up here is so much further than you're going to find anywhere else. And getting stuff done within the short building season up here in Alaska can be pretty challenging. And so that's just an additional layer of difficulty we have to put in on top of that. And also, houses here in Alaska, they're going to get more wear and tear on them faster than what they're going to endure I'm going to say anywhere, but most other parts of the U.S., the houses in Alaska are going to have a lot more wear and tear on them in a shorter period of time than what they're going to find in most other places. All right, so what is the takeaway for you? Well, first off, I just want to say we're going over a lot of 30,000-foot view stats, and we're talking about numbers and everything, and economic market factors that are outside of your control. And just know, stats don't really matter to the individual, because these are just stats, and you can beat the odds and not be part of the people who are really concerned and stressed out right now. That being said, though, affordability is becoming an issue more and more in Alaska, and it's not just Alaska, though. If you look at the stats really in anywhere in the entire country, affordability is just becoming more of a struggle, because we just came through a time of intense inflation. Still some inflation out there that's having an impact. Is just not as flagrant, I guess you can say, compared to what it was before. So I guess really the biggest takeaway I would give for people is, don't expect something big to come and happen and just bail you out. It is unlikely we're going to have any other big market movements happen that's going to suddenly just bust everything wide open, and suddenly all houses are going to be affordable and we're going to have a ton of inventory available. It's just unlikely that is going to happen anytime in the near future. That being said, though, what you need to do instead is focus on the stuff that you can actually control, okay? You can budget, and we can do everything that we possibly can to make sure that we put you in a position to succeed in this market or in any other market. And the reason that I'm harping on this so much of saying, hey, I know it sucks and it's still the right thing to do, because once you solidify that one line item, housing, in your budget, it stabilizes a lot of the affordability for you for a lot of the other stuff, because housing is the single largest line item on most people's budgets. And once that's stabilized, because you've got a mortgage and everything's kind of locked in, and there's only going to be a slight increase every year, hopefully, for property taxes, then at that point, you've got a lot more stability in your life. Versus if you're renting forever, those are just going to go up and up and up. And I didn't have a chance to really go through another graph from a website because, again, I wasn't really sure about their methodologies with this one, and I didn't really want to go into it very much. But what we saw is the affordability for rentals has actually decreased by about, I think it's like 28%. So even factoring in increase in salaries and everything in the past decade or so, affordability for rentals is continuing to become tighter and tighter. And if you want to avoid that, getting into a house is going to be the best way to possibly do that. And yes, that is going to be the best thing that you can do. Make sure that you have as much control over the actual controllables, like your budget and how you're setting yourself up as far as that goes. And for the love of everything that's good, stop blaming your problems on other generations, okay? I've heard the older generations get all up in arms at the younger ones, and I've heard it the exact opposite direction, and it's not healthy for anyone. So for the love of everything that's good, just focus on what you can focus on, and the other people do whatever it is that they're going to do, but do what you can actually do, okay? Just sitting there and complaining is not going to help a thing. Sorry, I kind of got up in my soapbox a little bit there for a second, but that has been my take on the affordability crisis here in Alaska. We do see that it is becoming, like everywhere else, it is affordability of housing is going to be continued to be something that we're keeping a close eye on. We see a lot of new construction going on in the Matsu Valley to try to keep up with it, but realistically, it is just going to be really difficult to keep up with the demand. And so affordability is going to become a growing issue. So that's going to be something that you need to make sure you elect the appropriate people to whatever your local government is, if you're already living here in Alaska, and control your budget. And if you want to talk and see how the other variables that you can control, do feel free to reach out to me on my website. Be more than happy to talk and see how we can best set you up for success. But this has been a really long-winded video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.